Hello, everyone. So glad that you could join me for this first installment of this new series. I'm really looking forward to sharing with you a lot of the cases that I've worked on and the phenomena that I've encountered over these many years. Just a little bit about myself for those of you who don't know a lot about me. My name is Ursula Bielski. I've been a paranormal investigator for my entire life, but I guess sort of officially since 1988, that's when I first started as a research assistant to James Horan, who is a parapsychologist and a psychologist, and started out helping doing research for investigations into spontaneous phenomena, ghost hauntings and things like this. So I would tag along with Jim and his team and investigations of haunted places around Chicago. The first investigation that we did was at the Red Lion Pub in Chicago on Lincoln Avenue, and that was on Easter Sunday night in 1988. And over the next few years, I helped out with a number of investigations with Jim, and I still work with Jim occasionally. Occasionally, he will still invite me to help with an article that he's working on. He's published many articles with scientific journals, professional journals. And so it's been really cool to continue to be involved in the parapsychology field in some way after all these many years. But I have been doing a lot of research for these many years. I've done many hundreds of investigations on my own all over the world, and I've experienced many things. And in the last few years, I've really done a lot of soul searching, and I've moved away from a lot of the research that I was doing for fun, such as, doing investigations in haunted places for fun or hosting events like ghost hunts for fun. And I'm going to go into a lot of that during this series, but I hope that you'll enjoy not only learning a lot about these different kinds of phenomena that we call supernatural, but I hope that you'll also enjoy I think picking up on the natural synchronicities that present themselves as we look at different things like ghosts and hauntings, demonology, Bigfoot and cryptid research, UFO research. There's so many similarities and connections that arise when you really start looking at these things on a regular basis. And we've seen so much more of that in recent years, where the synchronicity is really a big topic. I think what's the most interesting thing is that in recent years, I think things that will come up all the time in our discussions, things like demons, fairies, spirits, different sorts of cryptids, watchers, all these things that we get from folklore and mythology that for 1,000 years our culture has been dismissing as mythology and folklore. Today we see a real different movement, and a movement that keeps gaining momentum, that is trying to find the reality behind myth and folklore. We are trying to find what is really happening out there and what has been really happening out there that has led to these so-called myths or pieces of folklore, that so many people now really seem to believe that there is a reality to all of this. And it seems also, I think you'll find this just by exploring a lot of this, is that in so many different cultures, there are simply different names for the same kinds of phenomena. We're going to talk a little bit about that in our first installment tonight. So without further ado, let's get into our first topic. And this is a topic that I've been thinking so much about lately. And it's a topic that so many people have been thinking a lot about lately. It's really blown up. And that is the so-called missing 411 phenomenon. The missing 411 phenomenon, when we talk about it, you can't talk about the missing phenomenon without talking about a gentleman named David Paulides. And David Politis is a really unique person. He is someone that we've had to Chicago for our ghost conference. He spoke at our ghost conference at the Willowbrook Ballroom some years ago. And without a doubt, everyone over the years, over all of those many conferences that we hosted in Chicago, everyone said David Politis was the number one speaker that they wanted to come to the conference. And you'll find that wherever he goes, he is, the most requested speaker, because what he talks about is just so fascinating to so many people. And I'm sure that you're going to find out why if you haven't heard about David Politis and the missing 411 phenomenon. You're going to definitely hear about it tonight. But before we talk about David Politis and missing 411, I want to talk about how I first became interested in the missing. So we'll talk about the missing 411 phenomenon. That's usually means specifically David Politis' work, but just the missing phenomenon, or the missing enigma, as some people call it. And this is the idea that for some reason, in certain areas, large numbers of people will disappear for no apparent reason. Usually they're never seen again, or they're found dead, sometimes weeks, months, years later, maybe in different places far away from where they went missing. People go missing all the time, but there are certain criteria for the missing enigma or the missing 411, and we'll talk about those. They are very strange, unusual circumstances, and they seem to apply to so many of these cases. A lot of them are physical attributes of the people that go missing. A lot of them are mental attributes, emotional attributes. The people who investigate these things will not pursue cases that are obviously crimes, obvious drownings, obvious cases of suicide where people wanted to wander away and commit suicide or purposely get lost, things like that, where mental illness is involved. But there are certain criteria that apply to a huge number of these cases. Now, the first instance where I heard about the missing enigma was through my friend Scott Markus, a longtime friend and colleague in the paranormal field that is from Mundelein, Illinois, north of Chicago. And I first met Scott because he was the second person to write a book about, or third person to write a book about Chicago ghost lore. And I saw his book, Voices from the Chicago Grave, in a coffee shop some years ago, the Ashbury coffee shop, on the counter there down on Haunted Archer Avenue. And I was like, what is this? And I picked up the book and I was like, whoa, this is a book about Chicago ghosts. Who is this guy? And I finally met him, and he became one of my very best friends of all time, as well as his friend Dan Malone, an archaeologist in Chicago, two of my very best friends ever. And Scott is just an amazing person. He is an extremely fantastic paranormal investigator, or what I would call a ghost lorist, someone who looks into the history and the kind of culture and sociology behind our popular ghost stories, to see, kind of like what lies beneath the story, like what goes into it, what makes it, who are the people involved, and that attachment to the area or the place that the story has. So there's not a lot of people who do ghost lore well. Scott is he is great, so great at it. He is also a filmmaker and a film editor. He's worked on a lot of films and music videos and such out in Hollywood. So his big Hollywood connection too. He hosted ghost tours out in Hollywood and LA. And he's back now in the Midwest. He lives up in Madison, Wisconsin, married to a gorgeous, talented woman. And it's interesting because when I first met Scott, I didn't know anything about the missing enigma. And I found out that Scott wanted to come over and interview me for a project that he was working on with Jay Pachochin, also up in Wisconsin, who, as some of you may know, is a prominent Bigfoot researcher in Wisconsin and Illinois, and has done a lot of work specifically in the Kettle Moraine area in Wisconsin, where there are also a lot of missing cases, as a matter of fact. So Scott came over and he wanted to interview me about something that happened in Chicago in 1915, which is known as the Eastland Disaster. And the Eastland Disaster was when a picnic steamer turned over on the Chicago River on a summer day in 1915. It was basically a corporate picnic that was about to happen, and it resulted in the deaths of 844 people on the river. And to this day, many people who pass by that area of the river say that they hear screaming and crying coming from the river, and there will be like luminescent forms and faces that people will see on the water and things like this. But one of the most interesting things about the case is that oftentimes when people who walk by that part of the Chicago River where the ship turned over, they say they feel compelled to jump into the water for some inexplicable reason. And they won't know anything about what happened there. They don't know about the Eastland Disaster at all. They don't, let alone that it happened right there. But they say they feel like they want to jump into the water. Now, we didn't even know at the time. We did this interview very quickly, and I wasn't really sure what project he was working on. But we did the interview, and it was for a film called The Hidden Truth. And when the film was released later, it was only then when we actually premiered it at the Chicago Ghost Conference at the Politis Theater. And when I watched the film, it was only then that I saw the context that my interview was in, because in LaCrosse, Wisconsin, over the last, 20 years now, there have been these inexplicable events that have happened involving students at the University of LaCrosse. These are all athletic, strong young men that are attending the University of Wisconsin at LaCrosse, which, as you may know, is right on the Mississippi River. These young men, in all of the instances, will be out in one of the bars in town. They will leave to go back to their dorm or go back to their apartment. They will be walking home, totally fine, no problems, no suicidal intent, no fights, nothing like that. And then they are found dead in the Mississippi River. This got to such a point that the city of LaCrosse put up security cameras to try and capture what was happening to these young men. And there was some chilling footage that was captured that shows these young men calmly walking down the street towards where they live, when they'll suddenly stop, change their trajectory, and run full speed right into the Mississippi River and drown. This has been something that has happened in other missing cases too that we'll talk about. At any rate, I was fascinated by this haunted truth, hidden truth phenomenon that has been going on in LaCrosse. And the team that Scott and Jay was working with or put together, they explored a lot of different possibilities behind what was going on here. Of course, everyone says, oh, these guys were drunk and they fell in the river and drowned. But there are so many other of these college towns along the Mississippi River, but this is the only town that this is happening in. Also, in case after case, they didn't drink that much. They weren't drinkers. They weren't, they were going home. They were irresponsible. All sorts of things like this. One of the interesting things that the team found was that there had been a shipwreck not far from where these young men were going into the water. And they wondered if it was something that, like in the Eastland Disaster situation in Chicago, where there was some kind of an imprint, if you will, that was left behind there in that area of the river that was drawing these young men there, like almost like a panic, like feeling that there was something wrong and jumping in the river. Maybe they were even seeing an apparition of the shipwreck and jumping in to try to save people that were drowning. I think there were 11 people who drowned in that particular shipwreck on the Mississippi in LaCrosse. But it's fascinating. So it was a similar thing that was going on in both places. But they explored, there's a serial killer theory about the drownings. There are a number of Native American legends about the area that they explored. So it's fascinating. But the film is called The Hidden Truth. I'm not sure if it's available anywhere online. I'll try to look into that and post it in the comments if I find anything out about it. So, that's how I first became interested in the the hidden truth, the missing 411 phenomenon. And when I discovered David Paulides, I was like, whoa, Scott, Jay, this stuff is going on all over the place. And I told them that I had encountered this gentleman, David Paulides, who had been a police officer, and he had written a book called Missing 411, The Western U.S., That was his first book that was released in March of 2012. And it was a thick book of accounts of people who had disappeared in the national parks in the American West. And this was the first book of what came to be, I think it's 10 books now. And there's all different areas that he focuses on. So the Western U.S., Eastern U.S., outside of North America. There's a book just about places that have the name of the devil in them, like Devil's Tower, Devil's Gulch, Devil's Canyon, things like that. There is a specific book, A Sobering Coincidence, that talks about situations like in LaCrosse where there's alcohol that's involved. There's a book specifically about hunters. And there's a book about Canada. There's a specific book about Montana that came out a couple of years ago. So there's a whole series of books. And there was also a film that David had worked on for a long time that came out can't remember right, in the last few years. It came out in just the last few years. So there's a film called Missing 411, and there's a second film called Missing 411, The Hunted, that will chill you to the bone because it includes these famous recordings of some creature in the woods in the Sierra Nevadas that hunters captured in the 1970s. It's unlike anything you've ever heard. If you haven't heard these, I will put the link in the comments so that you can listen to them on YouTube. But David Politis has investigated well over 1,200 cases of people that have gone missing in the national parks. And he has discovered the thing that made him really begin to delve into this was that he was interested in this one particular case. And he contacted the national parks because he wanted a list of all of the people that had disappeared in the national parks in the United States. And he was told that no such list is kept. And he was so appalled by this, so horrified by it, that he wondered what was going on. And this is how he went down the rabbit hole into what has become known as the Missing 411 phenomenon from the title of that first book of David Paulides. So people that have gone missing and go missing in the national parks, they all, like I said, the cases have similar criteria. Usually, first off, it is people who go missing in the national parks. And David has created a map of what he calls the clusters. And I think there's something like 54 cluster areas in North America where people have gone missing from. The number one cluster is Yosemite National Park. And there are other large national parks and smaller national parks that are big cluster areas. When people go missing, it's usually around large bodies of water or near boulder fields or berry patches, huckleberries, blackberries, or other berry patches. Or they are found in boulder fields or berry patches. They're also often found near water or in water. But although the report will say that the person probably drowned, there's no physical evidence that the person drowned. So the body does not actually show signs that the person drowned, but it's just, that's what they put on the death certificate. Occasionally when people are found alive that have gone missing under these mysterious circumstances, they are found standing in water, found standing in a river, found standing in a creek, found standing in a flood area, standing water for no particular reason. Number two, people from both ends of the intellectual spectrum go missing. For example, people who have intellectual disabilities will often go missing, or individuals who are extremely intelligent, including scientists and researchers with extremely high IQs. Excuse me, people from both ends of the physical spectrum go missing. So people who are both very skilled at outdoor activity, who are very used to being in the outdoors, are extremely active and fit, and people who are physically disabled and literally cannot walk or walk long distances will go missing. If the missing person is found alive, they usually have memory loss about the event, no memory about what happened to them while they were missing. Children will often tell strange stories about what happened when they went missing. There was one situation where a toddler went missing on a cold night and survived the night. She claimed that a wolf had fed her berries from the palm of its hand. There have been other tales from children who have gone missing who have said that they were given food during the night. They were taken, first of all, by hairy people, and that the hairy people fed them berries and milk during the night. There was this is probably the number one most bizarre missing 411 case that many people, you'll see it all around on Reddit and everything on the internet. There was a case that occurred, I think it was around 2012, if I'm not mistaken. This occurred around Mount Shasta, a campground there. I think that was the McLeod campground area in Mount Shasta in California, where this boy went missing. I think he was 3 or 4 years old. He went missing from the campsite where he was camping with his parents, and he was found the next day. But after the family went home, he was with his grandmother some weeks later, and he told his grandmother that when he was missing, he had been taken by this entity that looked exactly like her, like his grandmother. That the grandmother figure had taken him to a cave, and that in the cave that he discovered that she was seemed to be a robot, and that there were other robots in the cave, but they weren't moving. And he said when they got to the cave, she put a piece of paper down on the ground and told him that he had to go number 2 on this piece of paper. And he told her that he didn't have to go. And she got very angry with him, and he was taken back out onto the trail and placed under a bush and told to stay there until he was found, and he was found the next day. When this little boy told the story to his grandmother, she was, of course, horrified at the story, but she thought, maybe it was this overactive imagination and he had made this up or had dreamed it or something. But there was something that was in addition to what the boy told that really made the hair on the back of her neck stand up and really freaked her out. And that was that, and as she told her son later, the father of the child, the year before she had been camping at that same campground with a friend of hers. The gentleman she was camping with was camping in his own trailer camper, and she was in a tent. And she woke up to find herself face down in the dirt outside of her tent and feeling very lethargic. And there was a large puncture wound in the back of her neck. She found out that her friend, who had been sleeping in the camper, also woke up with what he thought was a bite mark on his neck, a single bite mark. And he also felt very lethargic and sick. They both felt very sick, nauseated and sick, and drained of their energy. She really came to believe that there was something out there that is taking, like a DNA sample from people and creating these doppelgangers, or mechanical copies, clones of people. And I think she said that she had found other instances of people in the Mount Shasta area that had experienced similar things. At any rate, so there's very strange stories that children will tell about the time they've gone missing. There was another case where I think it was a little girl that went missing, and it was in a national park. I think this might have been in the Appalachians, where there were farms that were in the national park, within the national park area. And she had gone missing, and this local farmer discovered that one of his cows had been milked. And the little girl told authorities later that she had been given milk by these creatures that had that had taken her. And moving on, if the missing individual is found deceased, the cause of death is almost never determined. And we already mentioned this. It seems like they died without any cause at all. Now, oftentimes they're found in water, near water, and the medical examiner will say that it appears that they drowned. Another thing that is often said is that it appears that they died of exposure or hypothermia, even though the conditions are not as such that they should have, and that the body shows no signs of dying, no signs of hypothermia or of exposure. The missing are often found in areas that seem difficult, if not impossible, to reach, or in the time that has lapsed. One child was found 12,000 miles away in just a matter of 1,200 miles away in just a matter of a few hours. Children as young as 2 to 3 will go missing and be found at very high elevations, such as at the top of mountains, thousands of feet above where they went missing. Oftentimes, the children will have their clothes on backwards or inside out, and their parents claim that they can't even dress themselves yet. The missing are frequently found in an area that's been searched repeatedly by search and rescue teams. Numerous times over a period of days or weeks. Sometimes the areas have been searched hundreds of times, and sometimes the body is found literally in the middle of a trail that's used to access the area they're searching. It's almost as if they've been placed there intentionally to be sure that they're found. A lot of cases will involve people who go missing for a week or a month or more, but obviously only died a day or two prior to being found, which makes you think, where were they all of this time? And they don't seem to have there's no signs that there was hunger or thirst. They haven't lost weight. There's no signs of attack or assault to the body. There's no scratches. There's no trauma. There are also instances of people who seem to have been eaten by a predator, but only just now, even though they've been missing for weeks or months or even years. In most of these cases, the shoes are missing, either one shoe or both shoes. Many people are found in these high, difficult to reach places. Oftentimes it's raining or snowing, and they're wearing socks or they're barefoot, and there's no dirt on their socks. There's no wear on their socks. There's no cuts on their feet. Their feet aren't even dirty. Search and rescue dogs will be unable to pick up a scent, or if they are, the scent will just stop. Oftentimes, if there are footprints, the footprints will just stop, as if the person was just lifted off of the earth and or just vanished into thin air. People will say, well, these are animal attacks. There is no evidence of animal attacks left behind. There's no blood. There's no clothing. There's no hair. There's no signs of any struggle. Some people who survive have stories that when they were walking, these are oftentimes very seasoned hikers and adventurers. This is their happy place. They like being alone out in the wilderness. This is where they feel peace. This is where they feel calm. They will say they felt for no reason watched, fearful, panicked. These are the words they use. Some people say that they know they're lost and they're going back towards the way they know they came from, but something is trying to draw them to go in the wrong direction. They feel this overwhelming urge to go in what they know is the wrong direction. In other cases, people have said that it goes quiet. You suddenly don't hear birds, leaves, or anything like that, insects anymore. It goes completely quiet. And in some cases, people have also said they see that the surroundings seem to blur or shimmer. Others have said in a few cases, including one that was documented in Missing 411, The Hunted, the second David Politis film, people will see what looks like a huge sheet of plastic wrap, saran wrap, that seems to be like kind of rustling or shimmering, just, in the environment and the trees. Things that David Politis rules out. So these are, the berries. The berry patches. People will often go missing or are found in berry patches while berry picking. Or when they're found eating berries. So there seems to be some connection with berries. So what's going on? I'm sure invariably that I've left some things out. But as you can see, there are specific criteria that are looked for, and there are specific similarities, strange similarities in so many of these cases. So what is causing these people to go missing? And there are many theories, from the mundane, of course. Skeptics say these people disappear in the wilderness all the time. It's very dangerous. People are taken by mountain lions, bobcats, bears, what have you. They're taken away and they're eaten. That doesn't explain why a lot of time there's in a lot of these cases there's no indication of anything like that happening. And there have also been instances where remains, where body parts or bones will be found to have been buried in the wilderness. So what is causing these people to go missing? Of course, many people believe that the answer is Bigfoot. David Politis himself was and still is an avid Bigfoot researcher, although Politis never, he's famous for this, he never says what he thinks it is. He never puts forth a theory. He just puts the evidence out there from the cases and lets people draw their own conclusions. Is it Bigfoot? We do have a lot of these cases where, especially children, usually adults, when they go missing, they don't remember anything, but children will oftentimes talk about hairy men or hairy people when they talk about who took them or who took care of them while they were missing. And if we talk about Bigfoot, let's go and talk about other cryptids that are found in Native American legend and lore, including the Wendigo. The Wendigo is a creature that's talked about in Native American lore. That is, there was a movie made about the Wendigo recently called Antlers. I think that who was involved in it? Guillermo del Toro. Was involved in the movie. It's a good movie. It stars Kerry Russell, and it takes place out in Oregon. And it's about the Wendigo, and it's a pretty good movie. It's very dark, very gruesome, graphic, so not for kids. But the Wendigo is this creature with antlers, a big, huge, like man animal creature, like man, elk, moose creature, demonic creature. And it supposedly stems from an incident that happened, many years ago, when there was a human man who was found to be cannibalizing people. And he was kind of cursed and turned into this Wendigo because of what he had done. And so now his, he kind of roams the wilderness out in the American West and preys on other people. It is also said that the Wendigo has the ability to drive you insane instantly. And this is something that we find in a lot of these missing cases, that there seems to be some ability that if there's a creature that's taking people, that it has some sort of ability to hypnotize people so that they don't yell out, they don't scream, that they go with them, do what the creatures tell them to do, etc. And this is something that Bigfoot researchers have talked about for many years as a possibility as to why we have never found a Bigfoot, because they do have some sort of mental ability to to control other people in some way, or some hypnotic ability or something like that, or the ability to elude people because they know people are coming, something like that. There is another legend that I just recently discovered out in the American West, and that is the legend of the so-called stick Indians. And stick Indians are described variously. Some native tribes will describe them as very tall, sort of Bigfoot-like creatures. Others will describe them as the little people, very little people. But a lot of them are very malevolent, and it's always cautioned that in the wilderness you should never whistle, because the whistling will call them, and they will come to you, and if you don't have an offering for them, they will literally eat you. Sounds eerily similar to some of these cases, doesn't it? Where some of these cryptid creature descriptions, having some sort of mental control over people, taking people, and then eating them. Stick Indians are known to take people, especially children and women, enslave them for a period of time, and then eat them. If you whistle and a stick Indian calls, you better put out some meat or some other food, because if you don't, you will end up being eaten yourself, or being cursed, your family line being cursed, something like this. So yeah, it's interesting, because in some of these cases, we hear these stories of people's bodies being found, obviously eaten. The remains are found, but they're found long after the person disappeared or was taken or whatever happened to them. So where were they during that time? I mean, obviously, where did they go? Did someone take them? Something take them? And where did they go? And what were they eaten by? This brings us to a theory that has just recently showed up on TikTok, of all places, where there is a woman who is purporting that there are cannibals living in the cave systems of North America who are taking people and eating them. This person has a big following. I mean, you laugh at this. This person has a big following on TikTok. And it's interesting to read about. There's a map circulating out there as well on social media or Reddit or somewhere. Someone overlaid a map of the missing 411 Enigma of the cluster areas over a map of the cave systems in the United States, and they're pretty much totally overlap each other. And of course, the national parks are the places where most of the cave systems are situated in the United States. So is that just a coincidence that people are going missing from the national parks, and they happen to is there what I'm saying, is there a connection to the caves, or is it just because these are also happen to be the national park areas? Are these demons? Many people in different cultures talk about demons being banished to the wilderness. There are stories all throughout Native American lore that demons, fallen angels, were banished to the wilderness. Shamans have told us that they've gotten messages from the archangels, including Saint Michael, the archangel, that when the angels fell, they were banished to the wilderness. Or some of them were banished to the wilderness. You may know that churches such as the Catholic Church teach that demons are allowed to roam the earth and try to, drag people down to hell with them, try to tempt people into sin. According to some shamans and other psychics, some of these fallen angels are not allowed to do this. They were banished to the wilderness, to wilderness areas. And we get stories like this in Europe too, especially in the British Isles. There are stories in Ireland and Scotland about fallen angels being banished to the wilderness. So that's another theory that you will sometimes hear surrounding this enigma. You may find this all strange to talk about, but a lot of that I'm seeing recently is a theory that I have thought about years ago now, when I first started to hear about the different criteria in these cases and the kind of things that were happening in these cases. The theory that it's the fae, the fair folk, or the fairy folk, fairies, that are taking these people. Now, let's just stop right here now before you just switch this off and say Ursula's crazy. I have been a paranormal investigator for 35 years now, and I have experienced a lot of strange things. One of the strangest things that I have encountered is the existence of what I do believe to be fairies. Whatever they are, if they're demons or spirits or whatever they are, I believe that they exist. I've encountered numerous places where there are very, very verifiable, trustworthy accounts from very trustworthy people who have experienced them. One of those places is Bachelor's Grove here in Chicago, where I have very reputable people that I've interviewed over the years that have seen both fairies with wings and little people about 18 inches tall at Bachelor's Grove, both inside and outside the cemetery. It's a whole topic for a whole other day. But I first experienced this idea of fairies when I was, probably 20 years ago now, when I first started to do investigations in Northwest Indiana, and I was very graciously invited to speak at a banquet or a meeting of the Indiana Ghost Trackers, which is one of the oldest and largest associations of paranormal investigators of spontaneous phenomena, ghosts and hauntings in the country or the world. And after speaking at the meeting, we went to dinner, and then there would always be an investigation after the dinner at their monthly meeting. And I was taken as a guest to this farm in Northwest Indiana known as Luann's Farm. This woman, Luann, had bought this farm, and she had a guest over one day, and the guest was clairvoyant. She could, see things that other people couldn't see, or she claimed to. And she said, "Luann, you have fairies on your property." And Luann just about fell over. And she said, "You are crazy." And she said, "No, and it's pretty rare, in North America in general, and especially in these parts, to have fairies on your land. But it can be a good thing. It could be good for you. Could be good luck kind of thing, good for your, for your life. But you have to take care of them, because if you don't, they'll leave. And if you mistreat them, they will mistreat you, or, might even do you very grave harm." And so Luann, playing along, she said, "Okay, well, how do I take care of them?" And the woman told her that she had to feed them. So she said, "Okay, I have to feed the fairies. Gotcha. Okay, well, what should I feed them?" And her friend told her, "Well, you have to figure out what they like." So Luann was intrigued, and she said, "Okay, well, I'll give this a shot." So she got some little petri dishes, and she started putting little bits of food and drink out in the barn when she went to bed at night. And she would just put these out on a table, and she's put out strawberries, blueberries, little dishes of milk, tea, different things. And in the morning, bread. In the morning when she came out, usually she would find that the food was still there, hadn't been touched. But there were things that would be completely gone the next day. The little dishes would be completely empty. And so it was over time that Leanne discovered that her fairies appeared to like Frappuccino from Starbucks, Jameson's Irish whiskey, and there was one more thing. I think it was chocolate brownies. And this is fascinating to me, because I had, as a folklorist, read many accounts of people's encounters with fairies over hundreds of years. And fairies are known to like the finer things in life. They like coffee. They like alcohol. They like chocolate. They also like cigarettes, tobacco. And here I was listening to this woman in Northwest Indiana tell me that she was feeding fairies on her property with Frappuccino and Jameson's whiskey and chocolate brownies. Well, you could have knocked me over. And I sat in her kitchen for several hours as she showed me binder after binder after binder of literally thousands of photographs that people had taken in her barn, showing what looked to be these balls of light landing the palms of people's outstretched hands in her barn. And she said, those are the fairies. They come to you when I ask them to come to you. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. She said, no, I'll show you. So we went out to the barn. And like I said, we were it was doing an investigation with this team. And so there were maybe 20 investigators there. It's a big group of people. And everybody had a camera with them. And everyone had digital there were no cameras on the cell phones then, but everybody had most people had a digital camera at that time where you could see the pictures right away. Other people had 35 millimeter cameras too. But I tell you that because we were able to observe just exactly when the fairies, when these balls of light started to appear. Luann told me, go and stand in the middle of the barn, and everyone else sat down on the floor of the barn. And so when we walked into the barn and we were kicking up, hay on the ground and things, there were some dust orbs that appeared in pictures that people were taking. This is what we have once you kick up dust somewhere. You get these orbs in the pictures. But after everyone settled down and kept taking pictures, those orbs, went away. But then Luann started to talk. She told me to put my arms out to my sides, which I did. And Luann started to talk to these fairies. And she said, this is my friend Ursula. She is a researcher. She's just come to learn about you. She doesn't mean any harm. She just wants to know more about you. So could you show yourselves to her? And as Luann talked and people were taking pictures of me, you start to see these little orbs, these little balls of light coming into the palms of my hands until there's dozens of them in the palms of my hands. It was probably the most amazing thing I have ever witnessed in my many years of paranormal investigation. And so in the ensuing years, these ensuing 20 years or so since that happened, when I hear fairies, I don't laugh anymore. I think about it and I try to be open-minded about it because I experienced something there in Northwest Indiana that night that I cannot explain. And that has come up in many other cases over the years, which we'll talk more about at another time. Now, there are a lot of parallels between fairy activity and fairy disappearances that are allegedly connected to fairies. And there's a book that I found that was recommended on the internet. It's a book by a man named W.Y. Evans Wentz, and it's called The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries. And this author put together a list of things that generally tend to apply in cases where people are said to have disappeared because they were taken by the fairies. And these were stories from the British Isles, mostly Ireland and Scotland. So I want to read these to you. This is from some forum. I can't remember what the forum was. It might have been, I don't think it was Reddit. I'll try to find it so I can put the link in the comments. But I want to read this to you because this is from this work by Evans Wentz. And this book was published in 1910. So this is long before the Missing 411 Enigma comes to light, right? Long before David Politis or anything else. So over a century ago, this was what was being observed when people were disappearing and people said that they were taken by the fairies. People taken by fairies tended to be taken near boulder fields. A heap of stones in a field should not be disturbed, writes Evans Wentz. Though needed for building, especially if they are a part of an ancient place. The fairies are said to live inside the pile and to move the stones would be most unfortunate, oftentimes leading to a person's disappearance, never to return. The author says, when I asked someone on the land where the fairies live, he turned half around and pointed in the direction of a boulder field, which was in full of the skyline of where we were, of the town that they were near. The rocks are full of them, he said, and they are small fellows. So the missing 411 criterion, people tend to disappear or be found near boulder fields. Are people going to boulder fields to explore and being taken by fairies or some other spirits in these boulder fields that live under these boulder fields when they're disturbed, or is it agitating some unseen species that we can't see? Also from the book, people tend to disappear near berry bushes when they are taken by fairies. This is from the book. One day just before sunset in midsummer, I, who was a boy then, my brother and my cousin and myself were gathering whortleberries up by the rocks when all at once we heard music. We hurried around the rocks, and there we were within a few 100 feet of us, 6 or 8 of the gentlefolk, the fairy people, and they were dancing. When they saw us, a little woman dressed in red came running out from them towards us, and she struck my cousin across the face with what seemed to be a green rush. We ran for home as hard as we could, and when my cousin reached the house, she fell down dead. Father saddled a horse and went to get Father Ryan. When Father Ryan arrived, he put a stole about his neck and began praying over my cousin, reading psalms and striking her with the stole, and in that way brought her back to life. He said that if she had not, the boy had not gotten the prayers prayed over him by the priest, or the girl had not had the prayers prayed over, that the fairies would have taken her. So that death was actually seen as the fairies taking the soul or the spirit of this little girl. That note about hearing the music, this was something I heard recently from David Politis about people often reporting hearing music, especially flute music, before they disappear. And that's the last thing that they remember. So that's interesting too. The fairy profession was talked about. We were told as children that as soon as night fell, the fairies would form in a procession and pass around certain bushes. We were afraid, and our nurses always brought us home before the advent of the fairy procession. It is said that if you were out at the wrong time, you would be found dead because you had interfered with the procession. This lines up with a criterion about the missing 411 disappearances that I did not mention yet, and that is the fact that most people go missing at dusk, sunset. And this goes back to ancient lore too in the British Isles, and also, of course, the United States and Appalachia and those areas that are rife with, bloodlines, immigrants from the British Isles, that one should never go outside of the house at what they call the blue hour, at twilight, because this is the time when people are likely to be taken by the fairies. Another thing that I did not mention that comes up in this book is that during the missing 411 disappearances, there tends to be some sort of weather event after the disappearance, immediately after the disappearance, such as a sudden storm, a snowstorm, rainstorm, electrical storm, which hampers the search efforts. Interesting coincidence. And this is something that also was reported in 1910 in this book, that oftentimes after the person disappeared, after the person was taken by the fairies, there would be a storm that would break out, a sudden storm that would break out. You may remember that I talked about, during the national park disappearances, oftentimes these are very athletic, very fit outdoorsmen and outdoorswomen that are going missing. I also talked about the strong athletic men, strong swimmers at the University of Wisconsin in LaCrosse going missing during the up there on the Mississippi River. As in these cases, so in the cases of fairies taking people, young, typically athletic men would be taken by the fairies. It says that the fairy women were conceived of as half divine, yet not immortal, and they were always young and beautiful, and they would insist on the taking of the attractive and strong, athletic young men. As in the cases of Missing 411, fairies would tend to take intellectually gifted people. People who came back from being in so-called fairyland would be in a state of extreme confusion. People would disappear for days, weeks, or months and reappear suddenly untouched by the elements. Their clothes completely fine. No, weather damage, no appearance of being out in the elements for weeks or months on end. Similar to the Missing 411 cases where the clothing and the shoes, the socks, are just seem to be untouched. Okay, so as you can see, we've gone over the general criteria for the Missing 411 disappearances. And like I said, there are a lot of skeptics that talk about that these are just coincidences. Many people say David Politis conveniently leaves out information that makes the cases less mysterious, that there are many more cases of people disappearing, under natural circumstances. And that's definitely true. And he's always the first to acknowledge that a lot of people fall off cliffs and fall into rivers and get lost in the wilderness, go out into the wilderness to commit suicide, et cetera, et cetera. He acknowledges that. But I don't think you can really... I don't think you can really say that there's not something strange going on here, whatever it may be. Let me just touch really quickly on Yosemite National Park, which, like I said, is the largest cluster area of these disappearances. And looking a lot into Yosemite lately, and there's really strange things about Yosemite. And the Missing 411 enigma is just one thing about the weird things about Yosemite. And I'm going to be talking about Yosemite's, high strangeness in one dedicated episode of this program. So I'm not going to really go into it now, but Yosemite and that whole area, which is, close to Fresno, California, it's a very enigmatic area. And so I really want to go into a lot of the specific phenomena about it. There's strange cryptids there, disappearances, murders, serial killers, UFOs, all sorts of strange reports and experiences that people have. So we will reserve that for another day. So with that, I'm going to wrap up for this evening. I'm so glad that you joined me. For those of you not here during the live chat, if I haven't been able to answer your questions in the live chat, please feel free to email me. You can email me at ursulabielski@sbcglobal.net, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. I want to, of course, hear all of your stories, any similarities, any other similarities to cases you've heard of or things that you've experienced. So please do share whatever you have, and please do share your questions with me. And on that note, I will close up for tonight. I hope to see you all back here next Thursday for our next installment of this series. Thanks so much for being here, and I hope you have a great and wonderful night. Oh, do look in the comments, because I will post links to David Paulides' books. His website is the Can-Am Missing Project. And please, if you explore his books, buy them on his website, because they are affordable there. Do not buy them on Amazon, where they are very, very expensive. And also, please keep in mind to check those links for other things that I have referred to, such as websites in this program. So thank you so much for being here, and I will see you guys next week. Have a great night.